So welcome everybody to Catch Your Breath, How to Care for Your Respiratory Health. This is a timely topic. Well, I don't know if you remember that this time last year, many of us were having trouble catching our breath because our air quality was not good at all, to say the least, due to wildfires across the country, affecting almost every area of the country. And, knock on wood, so far this year, we are doing better in that department, and there's been more rain and less fires, but we don't know if that's going to change and when. And unfortunately, that may reoccur in the future. So that's one of the topics we're going to be speaking about this evening. As a reminder, if you have questions as we go along, feel free to type them into the Q&A area, and I'll do my best to get to all of those at the end of the presentation, which should be around 45 to 50 minutes. So in this session, we're going to learn a little bit about respiratory system anatomy, just enough to understand what happens when things don't work as well as they should, and then understanding what we can do and how the things we do and the actions we take benefits our ability to breathe easy. We'll talk about lung disease risk factors and some common respiratory conditions. Of course, none of the information presented in this webinar is intended to be taken as medical advice or as a substitute for anything your doctor has told you, especially when it comes to managing respiratory conditions. But this is, for informational purposes, designed to complement and help you understand your respiratory system and how to take care of it. And on that note, we will definitely be focusing in on food, nutrients, and supplements to support respiratory health. So what we can do to be proactive about our respiratory health. So as promised, we're going to start out with just a little bit of anatomy. I don't want anybody's eyes glazing over here. There will not be a test. But as a reminder, this is how and what the human respiratory system works and looks like on the inside. Of course, we have the nose and mouth. We breathe in through that, and the air then goes down our windpipe or trachea, and that leads and branches off into the bronchi, which lead into the lungs. And when you take that down to a microscopic level, ultimately those little airway passages end in the bronchioles, and these are ultimately made up of these little alveoli or little sacs that vastly increase the surface area for gas exchange, so we can take in oxygen and give out or breathe out carbon dioxide. And then we have blood, both to take in deoxygenated blood, breathe out that carbon dioxide, and then take the oxygenated blood back to the body. So that's an overview of how it works. Now, if you look even further at the surface of most of the tissue that lines the respiratory tract, on the left here you see a zoom in kind of cartoon version of what are called airway cilia. So we have these cells, those long, almost rectangular shapes with the funny looking circles in them. Those are the cells that line the respiratory tract. It's a type of epithelium. And the big gooey yellow looking areas, that's areas where mucus is secreted, which can be part of us clearing our airways and lungs. And then what's really important to keep in mind is our airways are lined with these tiny little hair-like filaments called cilia. And so this is something called ciliated epithelium, and these little finger-like projections will end up sweeping out excess mucus, sweeping out particulate matter. And when those cilia get damaged, or if they're decreasing in quality and quantity, which can happen as part of the aging process, then our lungs' ability to clean and clear themselves really becomes impacted. And this is very important for many respiratory conditions. So to zoom down in even further, and if you take one thing away from this session and this webinar, hopefully it will be this. When we talk about those little cilia and the hair-like projections, as well as the cells that line the surface of the airways, in our lungs, they are very rich in something called mitochondria. Now, you probably have heard of mitochondria. There's been more talk about this lately for good reason. Mitochondria are the batteries of all of the cells in our body, just about every single cell in the body. But some cells need more energy, need more batteries than others. So mitochondria make cellular energy, what's called ATP. That's literally what keeps us alive and going. And when we breathe in the oxygen, 90% of that is going to our mitochondria to make energy. The reason why things don't go so well if you hold your breath and you're deprived of oxygen, our mitochondria are deprived of oxygen, and that's ultimately what is harmful and can ultimately kill us if we hold our breath too long. And so mitochondria are important throughout the body, but again, in the highly energetic tissues, things like the brain and the ever-beating heart, very, very mitochondrial rich tissues. You can look at thousands and even depending on the tissue, 100,000 mitochondria in a single cell because they need so much energy. And that is similar to the cells that line the airway tissue. So mitochondria absolutely regulate this epithelial or these cells that line the airway tissue. And so this makes them extremely important for lung health. And if the mitochondria are declining in quality or quantity, it's difficult for our lungs to be healthy. Those cilia aren't doing their job, and things go wrong. So mitochondrial health plays a major role in COPD, which we'll talk about, and other lung diseases. And it becomes really important when our air quality is declining or has decreased, if we go through periods of that, like I mentioned earlier, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Like knowing how to support your mitochondria becomes very important for your lung health. So this, by the way, is a the little graphic is from a journal article, the American Journal of Physiology and Lung Cell Molecular Physiology, which sounds like fascinating bedtime reading. Mitochondria at the crossroads of regulating lung epithelial cell function in COPD, but this applies to just lung health in general, even if you don't have COPD. So this is an important takeaway point from our topic this evening. Okay, so in terms of risk factors, so the kinds of things that may predispose you or members of your family to developing lung disease down the road, or that can impact or impair your lung function, potentially compromise your lung function, there are some risk factors to be aware of. Now, you look at these risk factors and think, well, some of these things we can't do anything about. But the point of that is to be aware that if these do apply to you or a family member, maybe you need to pay more attention or take more steps to support lung health and the kinds of things I'll share with you. So preterm birth. The lungs are the last organs to develop. Many people have probably heard that some preterm infants, depending on when they are born, need to be treated with something called surfactant. So it's a chemical that helps to open the lungs and help them develop. And so preterm birth, especially anything, well, before 36 weeks, that's just 2 weeks premature. But certainly the earlier the more premature, the worse it is for potentially impacting lung health down the road. So if you were a family member was a preterm baby, then more attention needs to be paid to lung health. Now, the good news is here we don't know, and it doesn't seem that the implications or the effects of preterm birth on lung health last much longer than childhood. It seems by adulthood, most people have caught up, usually in terms of their lung health, but certainly throughout childhood, even potentially to early adulthood, this can impact lung health. Childhood air quality, interestingly. So where you grew up and how clean the air was can potentially impact lung function, certainly for the rest of childhood or even into later years. Maternal vitamin D intake, C intake, and essential fatty acid levels. So those are the omega-3s, for example. Those all can impact a child or a person's lung function for the rest of their life. Your own childhood vitamin D levels, in fact, seem to have an immediate and potentially long-term impact on lung function. Early viral infections. This is important. For example, respiratory syncytial virus that we've heard a bit more about in recent years. It's a virus that's always existed. It tends to come and go in waves, but for whatever reason, in the last few years, the reasons we won't get into, there have been a few kind of worse or more significant waves of RSV than in the past. And this may potentially have impacts, more lasting impacts or longer term impacts on lung function. And so anybody who has been subject to that may be wise to pay more attention to their lung health. Of course, no-brainer things like smoking or secondhand smoke, air pollution at any stage in life, and we'll touch on that in terms of our air quality, and ongoing exposure to workplace chemicals. These are all scientifically validated lung disease risk factors. So if you are exposed to these, pay more attention to being proactive about your lung health. Okay, so let us start with air quality and air pollution. Because, you know, we're having so far, thank goodness, a good year this year, but that's not the case. You know, last year, you may have heard, and this actually made the news just in the past month, that for the first time, Canada has been at the bottom of the list for air quality in North America. For the first time ever since this has been recorded, Canada is always top in terms of air quality. The cleanest air in North America has always been Canadian cities. And unfortunately, after a year of devastating wildfires in 2023, Canadians, for the first time ever, were breathing worse air and more polluted air than our neighbors, you know, stateside. And the top 15 most polluted cities in the last year have all been Canadian cities. So this is not good news, and this is something that hopefully we won't see again, but that seems to be unlikely that it might not ever recur, and we need to pay attention to that. So should that recur, or should you live in an area where air quality is not great, then what can we do about it? Well, air pollution, we need to understand a little bit about why it's harmful and what it does to us. There's a few things that air pollutants will do, whether those are coming from wildfires or factories. You know, I live in the Hamilton area, and anybody in the Golden Horseshoe will notice that the horseshoe's not so golden on many days. It's sort of a grayish, can be an orangish or yellowish hue. I guess yellowish is golden, but not in a good way. As you drive down the mountain, you can often see on warmer summer days, smoggy conditions. And so these air pollutants can induce, first of all, inflammation in the airway. They interact with the cells that line the airway, that ciliated epithelium that I showed you earlier, in a way that causes inflammation. And that can increase airway reactivity. So it's a natural response. The lungs are supposed to have this response in response to these inflammatory compounds we're breathing in to try to get them out. But that for us can mean more coughing, more irritation, more mucus being produced, and ultimately can potentially cause lung damage. As I mentioned, exposure during the first year of life has an impact on later lung function. So for anybody with young children who have had to go through that last year, maybe they had babies born last year, and then paying more attention to their lung function going forward is important. This is partly due to free radicals and oxidative stress. Not the only story, but I'll show you and explain why that's important. So free radicals, we know, are rogue electrons that go around damaging our tissues. The other word for this is called oxidative stress, a process that has often been likened to rusting of metal. Or if you cut an apple open and it starts to brown, that is oxidative damage being done. You can't see this when it's happening to our tissues, but certainly free radicals in polluted air are and do affect our lungs. So we'll talk about that later and how we can help combat that. So I'll say a few more words about wildfire smoke, since this was the reason that air quality plummeted in Canada in the last year and put us at the bottom of the list instead of the top where we had always been. Wildfire smoke The problem with it is it contains very small particles that travel deep into your lungs when you inhale. And this can lead to symptoms that you notice, like sore throat, eye irritation, runny nose, mild cough, more phlegm production. Again, this is all in the body's effort to rid itself of these little particles, but wheezy breathing and headaches. And it's ultimately the job of those little finger-like projections to help try to get those particles and sweep them out of your lungs. That's an important job they have to do at that time. That's part of what's going on. So just in terms of a public service announcement, some common sense things to protect yourself from wildfire smoke, which does apply to almost anywhere really with poor air quality. Should that reoccur this season or next, try to be prepared when you can in advance of the wildfire or polluted air season. If possible, using a portable HEPA air cleaner to filter the air in whatever area of your home maybe that you are in. If you're just at home, maybe in the evenings, or put it in the bedroom, or if you work from home, maybe put it in your office. And if that's not an option, then visiting public spaces such as community centers, libraries, shopping malls, which tend to have cleaner and cooler indoor air. Limit outdoor exercise on smoky days. And if you do work outdoors, use an N95 respirator that has been professionally fitted. Those are the only respirators that we know of that will substantially keep out this particulate matter. And then check your local air quality health index to evaluate regional and air quality conditions, especially if you're planning, say, outdoor events, for example. And very importantly, top up on antioxidants during wildfire season or smoggy weather. Now, that's because, as I mentioned, free radicals and doing oxidative damage are a big part of why this wildfire smoke or polluted air, whether it's coming from wildfires or factories, is problematic. But fortunately, we have antioxidants that we can use to help combat free radicals. This is really important. So I'll talk about that, where you get the antioxidants, how you get them in shortly, because that applies not just to polluted air, but it's important for all kinds of respiratory conditions. Now, we're going to talk about a few, air quality applies to all of us. The next few conditions might not apply equally to everybody listening in, but I imagine there are probably people with different respiratory conditions, some of these that have tuned in. So I'll just mention what I am and I'm not going to cover. We'll briefly touch on asthma, as well as COPD. A COPD, by the way, takes a few different forms: emphysema, chronic bronchitis. I'm not going to get into the particulars of each specific form necessarily. We're just going to give overall understanding of a broad understanding of that respiratory condition and the factors involved. Things I won't be getting into in this session include lung cancer, pneumonia, heart failure. You may think, well, of course you wouldn't get into heart failure because that's not a respiratory condition. But in fact, one of the most common symptoms of heart failure is a chronic cough. And so the point of me mentioning this and that I'm not getting into heart failure is that if you have a chronic cough, do see your doctor, get it evaluated, make sure that it's, find out where it's coming from and not assume that it's just a lingering cold, and you want to make sure that your heart is working properly. Okay, so let's just say, very broadly about asthma. This can affect people of any age, but we know that asthma tends to be more common among children, and one of the most common long-term diseases of children. Of course, adults can have asthma too, but we do often see this in kids. Sometimes it disappears with age, sometimes it doesn't. And this causes wheezing, breathlessness, chest tightness, coughing. And of course, severe attacks can be, in rare, unfortunate instances, can be deadly if treatment isn't achieved on time. Symptoms are often worse at night or early in the morning, although attacks can occur anytime. And sometimes asthma attacks can be triggered by stress. Some people get it due to cold air, exercise, and allergens. So again, the air quality in the last year has made it harder for people with asthma. It's considered to be an atopic condition. What does that mean? Well, it falls in the same category of conditions that we see like eczema, some types of allergies, even for some people, ear infections. So it's a condition in which the body's immune system is overreacting to triggers or things that somebody else's immune system might not act to. And so what happens with asthma, you can see on this graphic here on the left side, relaxed muscles around the airways, a normal healthy lining, a normal amount of mucus. But with an asthmatic lung, because of the overreaction from the immune system, it tends to have more swelling in the airways, which of course is something that restricts the breathing. There can be excess mucus production, which of course also will interfere with breathing. There can be muscle tightening that's inappropriate. So it's sort of like this overreaction from the immune system. Now, next, I'll also touch a little bit on COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. This is a very common condition. It takes a couple of different forms, but just sort of broadly, people with COPD often experience a shortness of breath, especially during physical activity, wheezing, chest tightness, a chronic cough that may produce mucus. And because of that, frequent respiratory infections. Often there is swelling in the ankles, feet, or legs due to circulatory issues. Many people, as like the person in this picture here, will end up on oxygen to help them breathe and maintain their oxygen levels. And although COPD is considered to be as the name suggests, a chronic condition and gradually progressive, there are things that people can do that slow the progression of that condition. Physical activity is one of them. Even though shortness of breath may come on during physical activity, studies have shown that maintaining physical activity is an important part of slowing the progression of COPD. Of course, you would want to work with your doctor or physiotherapist on appropriate exercise, but staying active and trying to maintain a certain measure of physical activity really is important for a number of reasons. One of which is that it helps to maintain mitochondria, but we'll talk about that shortly. So here's a look, COPD, it's a chronic inflammatory lung disease that causes the lungs to be obstructed, so it obstructs the airflow from the lungs. It's actually predicted to be the third leading cause of death. Oh, this is by 2023. I think that must be a typo, possibly 2033. So in other words, a major leading cause of death after heart attacks and strokes. It's typically caused by long-term exposure to cigarette smoke or other airborne particulate matter. And as I mentioned, COPD is progressive, but the progression can be managed and slowed. And I mentioned on this graphic shows that there's kind of two different types of COPD. Chronic bronchitis is one type, and then there's emphysema, in which we see a destruction of the alveoli, or the little breathing sacs. They can be collapsed by mucus and inflamed and damaged. But regardless of which type, inflammation is a major factor that we see in terms of the pathophysiology and the pathology of this condition. Okay, so that's just a broad look at two of the most common health concerns, asthma and COPD, and a little bit about what's happening there. So we've talked about the importance of mitochondria, we've talked about free radical oxidative damage, and we've talked about inflammation. So understanding that, we can look at some evidence-based nutrition advice, first of all. So let's talk about the bad stuff that we want to avoid or keep out of our diets. And studies have shown cured or processed meat, bacon, hot dogs, cold cuts, increased intake of that has been associated with worsening or more rapidly progressing COPD. Now, it's a bit tricky when it comes to those foods because there's not very many people who are eating diets high in those foods, but otherwise healthy. So sometimes those foods are markers of just an unhealthy diet in general. But just be aware that often cured or processed meats, things like bacon, hot dog, cold cuts, get lumped into meat in general, but be aware that the studies have shown that unprocessed meat, so regular meat that you might buy in the grocery store, either fresh or frozen, is in fact not associated with COPD. So it's not that you necessarily have to follow a vegetarian diet, but just not the junky stuff. Alcohol has been shown to be harmful for lung health in general, and except for red wine in moderation. Now, that may be because red wine tends to be a source of antioxidants. What is moderation? Well, current guidelines suggest no more than 2 drinks per week. And certainly if you're suffering with a chronic respiratory condition, you'd want to follow those guidelines. Intake of processed sugar is problematic for all kinds of things, and it also seems to be associated with worsening progression of chronic respiratory conditions. And increased intake of omega-6 essential fatty acids. So omega-6s, you find this in things like vegetable oils, seed oils, the kinds of oils that are usually used for frying at high temperatures, and they're typically overrepresented in the North American diet. The omega-6s are inflammatory. They put they're like the gas pedal for inflammation, and so that's one of the main reasons they seem to be bad for lung health. So trying to take these out of the diet, it's not too crazy a list, hopefully, but these foods have been shown to be harmful for lung health. Now, here do we get to the fun part. Which foods are helpful for lung health? Well, this pretty graphic that's in the back of this slide isn't just a pretty picture, but it actually is showing foods that are helpful for lung health. So the reason why colorful fruits and vegetables are beautiful and attractive to our eyes is because they signal to the body that they contain tasty and nutritious properties to them. Specifically, colorful fruits and vegetables typically signal foods that are rich in polyphenols that often gives them their color. Polyphenols are a wide variety of plant-based compounds that typically have antioxidant properties. Also, any vitamin C rich foods, and again, in this picture, we've got lots of foods that have both vitamin C as well as other types of antioxidants. Carotenoid rich foods. These have been also shown people who eat more foods rich in carotenoids. So green leafy vegetables, orange and yellow fruits and vegetables are rich in carotenoids. Carotenoids are yellow-orange pigments that are obvious in things like carrots and sweet potatoes. They're less obvious in foods like green leafy vegetables because they're covered up with the blue pigments, which is why the whole thing looks green. But if you've ever let your kale go off in the fridge and the blue pigments disappear and your kale turns yellow, that's when you can see the carotenoids that are still in there. So green leafy vegetables, and again, we're talking about here colorful fruits and vegetables, and then high omega-3 fatty acid intake. So the omega-3s, they counteract the omega-6s. The omega-3s are the brake pedal when it comes to inflammation. So these foods together will fight antioxidants and help with inflammation. And all of those things are beneficial for mitochondria, which I'll talk about again shortly. So, you know, we hear about the benefits of these foods for general health, for overall health, but there is specific research about their benefits for lung health. So obviously this applies to anybody with a chronic respiratory condition, but you know, in times when air quality isn't good, we should all be topping up on more of these foods because they protect us against the inflammation and oxidative stress caused by poor air quality. Specifically, there's studies done on specific foods, a lot of information, a lot of really interesting research on this. So specific foods that have been studied for their benefits for lung health. Yes, pretty much all of these fall in one way or another almost into that list I just showed because they're high in vitamin C or polyphenols or carotenoids. But specifically, individual studies have been done on beets and beet greens, peppers, apples, pumpkin, turmeric, tomatoes, blueberries, green tea, red cabbage, edamame, olive oil, oysters, Brazil nuts, coffee. That's all good news for everyone. Fresh brewed coffee is a great source of antioxidants. Swiss chard barley, anchovies, source of omega-3s, and lentils. So if you want a specific shopping list for your lung health, that is it right there. Oh, and red cabbage. Did I mention that before? I can't tell if I can see all of my list because of the controls, the webinar controls down below. Okay, so let's hone in a little bit more on the specific nutrients. Above and beyond getting more vitamin C in your diet, studies have shown that vitamin C supplementation of at least 400 milligrams per day improves lung function and slows the progression of COPD. This has been shown to help prevent smoking-induced emphysema and help restore lung function in mice. Now that the first study is on humans. The second study is in mice. The poor little things, they make them smoke and then study the effects of various treatments on that. But vitamin C has also been shown to reduce exercise induced bronchoconstriction. So for some people with either asthma or COPD, they find exercise can be challenging. And again, should be done under the supervision of a doctor or physiotherapist, but vitamin C may help make that easier. Lots of different choices when it comes to vitamin C. Here is one for your consideration. Liposomal high absorption vitamin C. This is 1,000 milligrams per 2 soft gel dose. So recommended dose here is 1 soft gel twice daily. And it provides vitamin C that is what's called microencapsulated. So it's mixed with phospholipids that create these tiny little droplets. And with the vitamin C kind of ensconced or wrapped up inside and helps you enhance or increase your absorption of vitamin C. So above and beyond a healthy diet for people who have chronic lung function issues, they might want to consider a high absorption form of a vitamin C supplement. Another nutrient that you may not be as familiar with, vitamin C everybody knows about, but N-acetylcysteine. Some people have heard more about this in the last few years because there's been more research coming out about N-acetylcysteine and its ability to help specifically protect seniors against flu, decrease frequency and severity of flu in seniors. But in our case, and for this topic, we're talking about N-acetylcysteine because the body uses it to make glutathione, and this is a powerful antioxidant. It's the body's major antioxidant that it makes on its own. We can get antioxidants in through our diet, but this is one that we make ourselves. But our ability to make antioxidants of glutathione declines with age. So NAC, NAC, or N-acetylcysteine itself is a powerful antioxidant, but the body also uses it to make glutathione even more powerful antioxidant. As a bonus, N-acetylcysteine is known for its ability to thin mucus. As a matter of fact, it's used as a drug for this purpose. So for people who have conditions that produce a lot of thick mucus, for some people that is a feature of their respiratory condition, then N-acetylcysteine is definitely something to consider. You can find it in diet in small amounts in both eggs and meat, egg yolks, which is why I chose that picture, this image here. But you can also consider N-acetylcysteine supplements for lung health. And again, people are taking it because it's been shown to help prevent frequency and severity of flu for people 65 and older. So here is N-acetylcysteine, or NAC, as it's often called for short. It aids respiratory health. It helps to replenish glutathione levels in the lung specifically, which again, powerful antioxidant, important to prevent free radical damage, and has been shown to reduce inflammation in bronchial tubes and lung tissue, again, thinning mucus. And an adult dose typically would be 600 milligrams or 1 capsule twice daily. So that's N-acetylcysteine, or NAC, sometimes it's called. Okay, and then another nutrient, which is a powerful antioxidant, also a big benefit to those colorful fruits and vegetables that I showed you earlier, is quercetin. This is a bioflavonoid. It's found in apples, onions, cranberries, herbs, berries, capers, which are the those little green kind of pods. They're actually the pickled flower pod or excuse me, flower bud of the caperberry plant, highest known food in quercetin. If you could get about maybe half a cup of those in your diet per day, very, very high intake of quercetin with that. Quercetin has been shown to have antioxidant and blood vessel protectant qualities. So it will protect the lining of the blood vessels. This is likely a key beneficial factor of the Mediterranean diet people are always talking about is so great. And this is likely a big reason behind that. Quercetin has been shown to also slow the progression of COPD. Now, again, this is in animal models of smoking. We haven't seen the same clinical work yet in humans, but all of the other benefits it has on lung and blood vessel function, so cardiorespiratory and pulmonary function, merits either trying to increase your intake of quercetin in the diet or consider a supplement. Again, blood vessel protectant, protects against free radicals. It is, by the way, commonly used for immune support and allergy relief around this time of year. People with seasonal allergies will start topping up on their quercetin intake. Quercetin is one of those nutrients that on its own, it is moderately absorbable, but it does benefit from some absorption enhancement. So in this case, lipomycel, again, this sort of microencapsulation where you get the quercetin in a soft gel capsule, but inside there, it forms like tiny little micro droplets that encapsulates the quercetin, so you can absorb more of it before it is broken down or leaves the body. So a general dosage recommendation would be between 500 to 1,000 milligrams daily with that. And then one product I would like to mention, because this, this is not a new formula. This has been on the market for a really long time, but it's just absolutely tried and true. And so if you're not aware of it, wonderful thing to have either on hand for people who have ongoing, respiratory concerns or conditions, but as well, if you're at the tail end of a cold that seems to have a nagging cough, this is a nice choice. So lung, bronchial, and sinus health formula. It's been shown to relieve sinus and respiratory congestion by thinning mucus and phlegm because it does contain N-acetylcysteine. That's the first ingredient in this. Has been shown to soothe irritated airways and calm dry coughs. It has a number of herbal extracts, mullein, wild cherry, horehound, and ivy. Those are all naturally cough-quelling herbs. It provides anti-inflammatory support for sinus pain. That's coming from bromelain, which is an enzyme that's shown to have an anti-inflammatory action. There's also marshmallow extract in here, which has been shown to what's called a demulcent. It is soothing to mucous membranes like airways. So a really nice option for people, again, whether it's at the tail end of a cold or any kind of sinus, respiratory, or cough discomfort. I know many people who have used this for years and really liked it. Okay, I explained the various ingredients in there. Okay, so then last but not least, as I mentioned, even though I haven't spoken much about it to this point, if there's one thing to take away from this topic, it is that our mitochondria, our energy producing centers, our little powerhouses, batteries, turbines, engines, whatever you want to call them, are extremely important to regulate the function of the cells that line our airways, our lung epithelial cells. This plays a major role in COPD and other lung conditions and diseases. So what can we do now, backing up? Oops, I'm not backing up, I'm going forward. So everything I talked about so far, especially the antioxidants, polyphenols, all of those are helpful for mitochondria. Because mitochondria are creating energy, electrons are bouncing around. This is something called the electron transport chain. It makes ATP. When you have this electron conveyor belt, you're always going to have rogue electrons escaping. Those are the free radicals, and they're bouncing around, creating damage. That is just the double-edged sword when it comes to mitochondrial health. As our mitochondria decline in quality and quantity, either due to the aging process or chronic lung conditions or poor air quality, we can end up with, it's like an engine that is producing less power and more exhaust. And so, yes, all of the nutrients I've mentioned so far are helpful for protecting us against the free radicals produced by our mitochondria. But there are other specific nutrients that people will take for mitochondrial health because they're looking for more energy support, but they definitely do help with lung function. So here's an example, the Regeneralife Mitochondrial Energy Formula. It is designed to boost cellular energy production, or ATP, reduce symptoms of fatigue, help improve strength and power, but all of the nutrients do that because of their effect on the mitochondria. It makes them very useful for lung health and lung function. So coenzyme Q10, very well known for its ability to work within the mitochondria. Acetyl L-carnitine, sometimes called the fat bus, or the fat shuttle, will take fatty acids, drive them into the mitochondria, where they'll be burned for energy, helps you make more energy. Elevate ATP is a combination of nutrients shown to increase ATP output. Glutathione, I already mentioned, very powerful antioxidant. And then superoxide dismutase, it's an antioxidant that is involved in and around the mitochondria, but especially in the lung. So I'm throwing a lot of terms and a lot of nutrients at you, but the idea here is that this Regeneralife combo has all of those key nutrients in them, and helping the mitochondria helps your lung function. So specifically, low coenzyme Q10 levels have been shown to promote the progression of COPD and asthma. So getting your CoQ10 levels up. CoQ10 is challenging to get through diet. The best known food, highest, richest source of dietary CoQ10 is heart, like beef heart or chicken heart. And I doubt anybody has eaten that today or even in the last week or month. Not a common menu item. CoQ10 has even been shown in some studies to reduce the need for steroid medication in asthmatics. Now, again, this is not medical advice. This is not meant to be taken in place of steroids or any kind of prescription medication, but just to be aware of the kind of research that's being done on these sort of nutrients. L-carnitine, this is a nutrient that's been shown to improve walking distance in patients with COPD. And superoxide dismutase is a key antioxidant in lung tissue. So again, this combination that is usually sold for improving mitochondrial energy has no stimulants, no caffeine in it. Also a great choice for chronic lung health concerns. Okay, so that brings us up to exactly 7:45, as promised, about 45 minutes worth of information, and then another quick look at the individual nutrients and supplements that were covered. And this gives us time to then look at the questions. By the way, one question I'm getting a lot more often lately is, how do I know I'm getting a good natural health product? Or how do I know that my, whatever ingredient or product doesn't contain X, Y, or Z? You can look for this logo on your product labels that you're buying. A number of different labels will carry this. Ishura, you can check out the website ishura.ca, testing for up to 800 possible contaminants using state-of-the-art testing. This goes above and beyond the basic Canadian guidelines for things that might be lurking in products that you wouldn't want to have in there, and making sure that products are non-GMO compliant, contaminant-free, adulterant-free, authenticated, and accurately labeled.